Kicking it off, can I just confirm that the presentation has shared, Emma and Ken?
Yes,
got some nods there, which is good. Okay, so today's focus is going to be on intersections, which is commonly put in the too hard basket, and a lot of the times that we approach intersections as cyclists is let's just get rid of the treatment altogether and fend for yourself, good luck, which is not a fantastic arrangement. So today we're going to discuss some road safety treatments that we can implement to really improve the level of safety for cyclists. For those playing on at home, we've got good news. Wally is back in this presentation. So for those that got into it last for our first module, it was a question in the quiz that stumped quite a few people, and perhaps I was a little bit too harsh on the tolerance allowed for that. So I've made this tolerance a little bit more friendly. So if you are playing along, just remember, if you see this little sign here, Wally the Wombat with his little hat on there, if you see him throughout the presentation, just take a note of how many you see, and it will be a quiz question following on from this module today. So just keep a note of how many Wallies you see. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the 360-degree footage for module number 2, which discussed different on-road cycling facilities. And Ken, have you got any input that you wanted to share regarding these sites that we had a look at?
No, I think, well, just very briefly, the Wellington Street example, so the protected lane there, the Copenhagen style lane, was quite an interesting case study from here in Melbourne, and some of you may have heard of it, or some of you may have even ridden it, but it was really one where it was quite amazing to watch the local government's commitment to the project and the idea and the vision that they had. And of course, I mean, with any infrastructure change, we know that there's going to be pushback from segments of the community. But they were able to sort of hold to their vision and saw quite, big backlash from the community with some parking removal, quite a bit of a change to the cross section of that street. And yeah, they managed to sort of see that through there with their commitment. And it's really, all the complaints and everything have died off 6 months to a year later. It's working really well. They did make some alterations during the development to try to, keep as much parking as they could. But overall, they stuck to it. And it just really shows to me that, with any of these sort of fundamental changes we're going to make to a road or a street, of course, people are going to complain. That's an absolute given, because you're changing stuff. People don't like change. And so you've got to be confident that it's the right vision. You're going to get over that hurdle, and the complaints will die off, and people will accept it and use it in the way. So that's, again, as I say, a really good example of where a council pushed through that, and they've got a just wonderful facility there.
Thanks, Ken. And just for example too here, for those that have already watched the video, this is a more, I suppose, traditional approach to on-road cycling, where it's just a painted bike lane directly adjacent to the Doring Zone. And in this particular vision, you'll see that the bicycle lane just disappears, so that you've got this provision for cycling and then you've got nothing. So you're basically riding in this wide curbside traffic lane. And for those that have viewed it, you probably would have seen the significant need for improvement in this, and just how vastly different it actually feels cycling in a facility such as example 1 compared to example 2. In example 2, you're constantly kind of aware of the traffic just adjacent to your right, as well as hoping that the door doesn't open right in front of you, whereas example 1, you've just got this lovely run. So it's almost like chalk and cheese. And if we are looking at getting more and more cyclists on our network, then we need to see more and more of example 1 out there. while we're still discussing on the on-road bicycle lanes, you may have remembered from last week's presentation that I mentioned that we recently did a road safety audit for an on-road protected facility. And I mentioned that the parked vehicles were using that as, just a little bit of extra room for their wheels to tread on. So I just wanted to share this photo to show that this was from our road safety audit last week, and just some of the traffic there making the most of that extra room. This kind of facility was already a 1 meter protected facility. So for those who remember from last week, the door can swing open up to 1.2. So the design already didn't really account for the full width of that dooring zone. And now you've got an even reduced width as vehicles are using the separator island to actually park up on. And this, I suspect, is some form of protest, as these would most likely be locals, and they're just not happy with this facility. So they're just basically taking ownership of it. Here's another example of a vehicle using that facility, not as it's intended, not providing the buffer there for the cyclists, which is not ideal. And I'll open it up to the group. If I just maybe hop onto this image here so you can see the separator island a little bit better. But what kind of, if you were conducting a road safety audit like we were, what kind of recommendations could you perhaps suggest to council to improve the level of safety in this facility, and in particular to address the issue of parking on the separator island? So if anyone wants to pop down some thoughts in the chat, and Emma, if you could just let me know if anything comes through.
So, oh yeah, absolutely. We've got a few things here. So a hard edge on the vehicle side has come through.
Perfect. So that's sometimes referred to as barrier curb. So I'll just circle this on the left-hand side there. That's an example of a barrier curb. And if that was installed on this side as well, vehicles would be much less inclined to ramp up that, just because unless you've got a four-wheel drive, it will make it quite an uncomfortable experience. So that simple shift in changing the curb shape could make all the difference in this instance. Any other suggestions?
Vertical curb on the roadside.
Mm-hmm.
On the car park side, the drivers probably think that there is insufficient width for parking as well as through traffic. Maybe.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Yeah, so you could look at actually painting the bays as well, just to really highlight that there is sufficient room there for parked vehicles to park there without having to encroach on that space.
Traffic lanes, 2 traffic lanes. So, well, someone's asking, what are the widths of those lanes?
I couldn't tell you at the top of my head, unfortunately. Yeah. It is a local street environment where only one vehicle can pass at a time, so you can't have 2 opposing movements. One has the proper weight in the parking lane. Yeah,
signage and parking markings has come through as well. And a barrier curb or take interior of several Iron Maidens and Araldite to the top of the island. That's a fun one.
Oh boy, okay. Another suggestion there is, putting something in the middle here. So you could put parking signage or flexible bollards, something like this. Excuse my poor drawings, it's difficult on a mouse, but that would once again, try and deter parked cars using that space if you've got something physical there to stop that. So just another suggestion there. But thanks everyone for providing some feedback on that. We'll be sure to include that in our audit report. So thank you very much. Today's agenda is all about intersections, and we will be covering a lot of what's in this appropriately named document, which is called Don't Give Up at the Intersection by NACTO, which is a US transport organization based out of New York. And it's a really fabulous reference if you are stuck at exactly what to provide at intersections and how to improve cycling safety. They have a lot of guidance on protected intersections, more so than what we have, within the Australian context. So we will go through the design, what exactly a protected intersection is. We'll run through some international examples, as well as do a little bit of bragging and chat about the Melbourne's protected intersection, which is the first of its kind. There is also one in Queensland in Caloundra, but I wanted to focus on Melbourne just because I'm a local proud of this particular facility. So, and we've got some excellent footage of it as well. So we will chat all about protected intersections as well as signalised intersections and what you can do in this space as well. Things like head starts, treating left and through treatments, hook turns, as well as bicycle signals. So there's a fair bit to cover today, and I will also encourage everyone to continue typing away with any comments in the chat, and we will pause at various times just to answer those questions. But let's get stuck into the protected intersection. So this is a beautifully graphically designed or rendered version of what a protected intersection look like. A few things that are probably the most critical to the design is these features here. So my pen may be a little bit delayed there, but in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see there's these kind of islands that are in place right on the corner of the intersection. And what that does is it provides an offset from through traffic or left turning traffic. So it provides an offset from this kind of movement, either through or left, from your bicycle traffic. So from this guy over here. So there's this offset, which is really, really critical in this protected intersection design. And I'll explain exactly why that's so important as we go through these slides, but just as a general overview of what a protected intersection is, you're going to be having to look for these kind of little blister islands, they're sometimes called, or quarter refuge islands. And they're all funny type of names, but kidney islands sometimes. But they're right there on the corner, and they separate the bicycle movements from left turning traffic, essentially. That's the critical movement. So let's compare that to how a conventional intersection will work. So typically you would have a bicycle lane that is right up against the left turning general traffic lane like this. And so you've got a cyclist that is not really within the line of sight of a left turning motor vehicle, which makes it incredibly difficult for the left turning vehicle to actually see the cyclist. And there is the road rule that states, if there is a left turning vehicle, cyclists cannot cycle through, so they have to be forced to stop. However, there's plenty of instances where this vehicle may not be showing that they're indicating left, or there's just that incredibly awkward moment where you don't know as a cyclist whether you have to slam on the brakes and give way to that left turning car, or just try and speed up and try and beat that car, which can lead to obviously conflicts as well. So that left-hand diagram is an example of conventional intersections, basically the bicycle lane right next to the left turning general traffic lane. With the protected intersection, as you can see here, as I mentioned in the previous slide, we've got this quarter refuge island, which is used to provide this offset from the bicycle lane, which is well away from your left turning vehicle lane. And as you can see in the diagram, what this actually does, it creates a more favorable angle for when the general traffic left turning vehicle crosses over the bicycle path. So you can see in that field of vision, I might use a different pen now because I'm getting tired of that red. Let's see how the green works. You can see that field of vision is actually within the scope of where the cyclist is, as opposed to you cannot see this cyclist, or it's incredibly difficult to head check basically and see that cyclist there. So you're missing that opportunity and increasing the risk of that conflict point there. So I'll just reiterate that once again. This offset from your left turning traffic lane or the through lane to the bicycle lane is facilitated through this beautiful corner refuge island. And that offset is what really provides opening of the sight lines for left turning vehicles, and it provides a much better opportunity for left turning traffic to be able to see the cyclists and stop in time rather than kind of hoping for the best. A few more points on the design, I'll just hop on. We'll go back to my red color now. So I've got a few different items here, which kind of just spells it out. This is obviously a plan view as well as a 3D image of how this road environment looks. This was taken from the MassDOT, which is the Massachusetts Department of Transport, Separated Bike Lane Planning and Design Guide. Another fantastic resource. It's within your memory stick if you've got that yet, or it's also available online if you want to download that. Another sensational reference. Just wanted to point out that I have flipped all these images around because obviously being the US, it can be a little bit confusing seeing all the traffic driving on the right-hand side of the road. So for this training purposes, we've flipped those images just to make it a bit clearer. But let's have a look at some of the things that they're talking about. So we've got the Corner Refuge Island, which is noted as number 1. And you can see number 1 on both the plan view as well as the 3D view. Interestingly, for this particular diagram, they've shown that this kind of loop, it's either a joint use pole, perhaps it's a signal or a lighting pole, is situated within that Corner Refuge Island. It's not something I would really consider being best practice, just because from experience, having seen how the Melbourne's protected intersection works, that Corner Refuge Island is struck more often than not. So it's not, although there is means to demarcate that that's clearly not something you should be mounting, it doesn't mean that vehicles aren't tracking over that, particularly long, heavy vehicles that perhaps don't know they can't see the back of their vehicle and, having to collide with that. So although they've included this pole in the graphic here, it's not something I'd really consider as best practice, because I would imagine this would actually get struck quite often. And if that was on, say, a slip base pole, and that were to fall down, you've got that falling then into an intersection where there's potentially cyclists and pedestrians crossing, which is also not a great outcome. So just something to note within that diagram. I've got a forward bicycle queuing area. So that is an area where cyclists can basically store as number 2. So I'm just going to highlight that area there. You can see that they're able to store away from the general traffic, and they're also protected by the Corner Refuge Island. So it provides them a level of safety that they feel comfortable. I can stand here, I can wait for my signals to go, and then I'm ready to go and I'm safe. I don't have to worry about a vehicle coming from behind and clipping me, or a left turning vehicle coming from in front and knocking the front tire or something like that. So providing that queuing area. The actual length of that queuing area will be dependent on the expected number of cyclists. So in a few of the international examples I'll go through, we've got one from the Netherlands, and their queuing area is significantly larger than, I suppose, what we would have here in Melbourne. And that's all to do with the number of cyclists that they have there. So there's plenty of room for the cyclists to stop, pause, queue, wait for their signals to go, and then they can head off together. It's obviously very dependent on the numbers you're expecting there. The motorist yield zone is item number 3, and this is, in some jurisdictions, they actually formally provide give way line marking, like shark's teeth. For those that are familiar with that, I can show you an example of what that looks like. But basically, it's just an area where you're communicating to the driver that you have to give way in this space. So highlighting that cyclists kind of have priority across there, and the motorists need to slow down and give way to anyone, either pedestrians or cyclists crossing at that space. We've got number 4, the pedestrian crossing islands. This fellow over here carrying a box of some kind, maybe he's just ordered pizza. Just a separate facility there for pedestrians to cross, which is taken, that is also separated from cycling traffic, which is not always used in protected intersections. Sometimes you have this amalgamation of pedestrians and cyclists kind of share this one crossing point, and it's a bit of a free-for-all, who stands where and who goes where. which is not a fantastic outcome. If you are able to provide separate pedestrian and cycling crossing points, as is shown in this example, generally that would be the favourite approach, as I'm sure those that have, pedestrians crossing next to cyclists, it can be a little bit, unpleasant if cyclists are at speed or if they're weaving in and out of pedestrians or something like that. So it is ideally best practice to have those two separate crossing points. Pedestrian crossing of the separated bicycle lane. So that's number 5. It's not incredibly well shown in that 360 version, sorry, the 3D version, but in the planned version, because this is a US reference, you'll see that they kind of use the zebra across the pedestrian crossing, which is not something that we typically do in Oz. However, what this is really stating is you've just got an opportunity there for pedestrians to have the priority across that cycle path. So in other words, I'm going to change my color here again because I'm getting far too much red. I'm going to try blue this time. If I had a cyclist coming across in this direction and continuing their movement across like that, you just want to ensure that pedestrians actually have the right of way completing their crossing. So cyclists need to give way at this point rather than let cyclists go all the way through. Otherwise, you might get pedestrians just kind of stuck in an awkward position and they don't feel comfortable crossing. So that's what number 5 is all about. And finally, number 6, pedestrian curb ramp. We would spell curb K-E-R-B, but we would actually call this a pram ramp. And that's just obviously ensuring that pedestrians can access the crossing without having to, navigate some kind of curb and channel. They've got sufficient facility there. And that would obviously also need to be DDA compliant, ensuring that the appropriate tactiles and the like are in place. So that's a high level of protected intersections and what the design actually looks like. I'm going to jump into some examples there. I was just going to pause and check to see if we've got any comments that have come through, Emma.
Yeah, I would just have a couple of questions. What is the minimum space required or road width to incorporate a protected intersection? That's a good question.
Yes. So typically a protected intersection would eat up one of your current stand-up lanes. So I can show an example of Melbourne's protected intersection where we had an existing signalised intersection and how that's been transformed into a protected intersection. The exact width, I haven't got a figure in front of me that I could quote on, but just as a general rule of thumb. Oh,
Max, can I just jump in there on that one? I'm actually going to steal the screen sharing briefly, if that's okay. It's only going to be half a second here because I've just picked a random intersection in Tasmania with that, just to show that sort of stand-up lane. Now, you see with an intersection like this, you've got a bike facility. I assume you're seeing my screen?
Yep, that's come through.
You see a bike facility that drops off to provide for that extra stand-up lane there. So this could be left or it could be the one going through. You kind of sacrifice that in order to provide that extra space for your bicycle facility and Kidney Island. You can see that this on all approaches, just drops the bike lane off, extra car lane, and then rejoins the bike lane. So you're providing that connection through for the bike facility. And it's going to saturate your intersection for passenger vehicles a little bit. We know that. We know a stand-up lane makes them run through. But if you've dedicated this as a strategic cycling corridor, a priority cycle route, this is the one you want the cyclists to be using. And you make those sort of compromises. And Max will show you the example from Albert Street, but I thought one there. If anybody can tell me in the chat which intersection this is, and it's in Tasmania, I'll give you
already have someone ahead of you, Ken. Frederick Street in Launceston.
I'll turn it on. Labels on. Frederick Street, Launceston. There you go.
Wow.
Great. That came in even before you asked. So, right.
Okay.
That's impressive.
All right. Back to you, Max. Sorry, I hijacked it. I just thought that I mean, and the thing was that I just picked, any intersection very quickly in lawn session because I knew you can. It's just absolute common practice to have that extra stand-up lane for vehicles like that. I don't know whether that Nigel will tell me probably straight away whether that is a strategic cycling corridor route for bikes, but that's the kind of decision you got to make.
I think that really answers that question perfectly. So thank you, Ken. Thanks for sharing the screen and providing the Tassie example. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Emma?
just one about how does this work for larger vehicles or perhaps even heavy vehicles?
Yes. So as we kind of made a note there, the fact that you've got this corner refuge island that juts out a little bit and tightens the radius of the intersection. How exactly do we ensure that heavy vehicles aren't constantly mounting that feature and able to make sure that we've got the swept path there to cater for those movements? And there are ways to facilitate this, which I'll jump into later in the presentation because I've got a full section dedicated to this, but it's good foreshadowing because it is a serious thing to consider, and there are ways around it. So I will touch on that later, Emma.
No worries. And then there's just some comments around the concerns around solid objects in the corner refuge islands and things like that, maybe interfering with visibility. So a couple of those. I think
Totally.
that's about it.
Yep, no, that's all valid. So I take that on board, and I'm sure that these protected examples, you might get a little bit more insight as to how they actually work. So hopping into the first example, this one is not quite a protected intersection. This is what I would show as the before case, which is in the Netherlands, Holland. You can see there's some protected facilities kind of in the southeastern quadrants. However, the legs that I really want you to focus on today is this northern leg, where you can see there's a little bicycle facility here, and also this eastern leg, where you've got a bicycle facility over here. So I'm just going to show indicatively how these two legs would cross over this intersection going through. So not performing any maneuvers left, right, just going straight through. So this northern leg would obviously just cycle straight through like this and continuing their path. And the reason that this is, I suppose, an issue is because your left turning vehicle here, so say this red car wants to complete this maneuver like that, you'll see this angle of conflict, which I'm going to highlight in, let's go for purple. This point here, the angle is extremely restricted. So your ability to spot the cyclist while you are the red car is incredibly limited, which makes your riding ability a little bit more nerve-wracking because you don't know whether or not to go through the intersection or to pause and wait, let that left turning vehicle go. And it just creates this point of indecision, which can be fairly significant risk for cyclists. I'll also just demonstrate the risk here that we have for the eastern leg. So this eastern leg comes through here. As you can see, I love annotating things, so I get a real kick out of it. So hopefully everyone's understanding exactly what I'm talking about while I'm drawing these funny squiggles. But that blue line represents the eastern cyclist traveling through. And if I was a motor vehicle slightly off the page here, but he would be coming through and have to cross over into the slip lane. And obviously, once again, creating a conflict point with the cycling traffic at an angle that is, once again, incredibly difficult to spot your cyclist. So that's what at the crux of protected intersections is ensuring that there's adequate sight lines for left turning motor vehicles to be able to spot your cyclists without creating these conflict points where you're kind of hoping for the best. You hope the cyclist isn't there, which I'm sure everyone who has driven vehicles before through these standard signalised intersections where you are turning across a bicycle lane, as is shown in that eastern leg, you do your checks, but there's always a risk that there's a cyclist there in the blind spot. So that is the before example. Let me clear all my annotations, and I'll hop into how things look in current day. And we'll see we've got a protected intersection. So here's what I was talking about with these corner refuge islands. That purple is blending in pretty well, so I'm going to just change that over to a red. We've got the corner refuge islands on each side of the intersection, such as this. And let's have a look now how the cyclist travels through those two legs that I was showing before. So I'll go first to the northern leg, and the cyclist is carried somewhat off-road to this section here, and then they pass over through here, like so. Sorry if that blue is quite light. Hopefully that's still legible. And as opposed to, let's see how our left turning vehicle travels through. Whoop, missed it a little bit, but there we go. He comes through there. You can see at that conflict point now, the cyclist is crossing right in front of the line of vision of the vehicle turning left. So the ability for that vehicle, that motorist, to spot the cyclist is improved immensely. Similarly, with the eastern leg that we'll look at, and I'll draw the car first this time just because I've already got the red pen out. This left turn lane, it's no longer a slip lane anymore. It's just a typical stand-up lane. And the cyclist is once again got a protected off-road facility, which comes across here, and then when they cross over, something like this. Once again, this line of sight is much increased in compared to what was previously provided. So that's really how the protected intersection is working, providing that offset from the left turning traffic lane to your bicycle lane. And what that actually allows for is increased line of sight where that conflict point does exist. In an ideal world, there'd be no conflict points, and you would have, beautiful overpasses at every intersection, or maybe underground tunnels or something like that. But I'm not sure we live in the world of, don't need to worry about finances at all. So this is I suppose, the next best thing to providing cycling safety at these intersections. So I'll just hop down to some ground level of what this intersection looks like. I do just want to stress that this one is, because it's the Netherlands and cycling is obviously part of the DNA there, and so, embedded in their society, that they can get away with perhaps a little bit more than what we would be able to get away with in an Australian context. So what I mean by that is this corner refuge island is actually just flush against the rest of the pavement, which to me, I think what we would have in Australia is, motor vehicles just traveling straight across there and ignoring that little curb island altogether. So not the best example, this particular instance, but I just wanted to show that this is what they, in some instances, do in the Netherlands, because they just have a much greater awareness of cyclists being in the area, so they can, I suppose, get away with these slightly different design things. But certainly in Australia, I'd expect to see this all raised up to provide a more physical obstruction in the way of vehicle swept paths. Another example here, just shown at a different angle. Once again, you can see that is completely flush with the rest of the pavement, which really, to me, doesn't communicate that level of separation, but I suppose it works in the Netherlands, so I'm not going to argue too much with how they kind of facilitate these things. But if this is, so I will just draw this for, remember they drive on the right-hand side of the roads in the Netherlands. So this is a right-turning vehicle, what would otherwise be a left-turning vehicle. You can see once again that right-turning vehicle is completely perpendicular to the crossing cycling traffic, and they have a much better line of sight to see everyone crossing over. I also mentioned earlier on that some jurisdictions apply a give way line marking. In the Netherlands, they use these little triangles, sometimes called of shark's teeth, and that indicates to motorists that you need to give way at this spot, basically. Our signalised intersections, we tend to acknowledge that is a place to give way, and we don't have this formal give way treatment, but it's just something to note other jurisdictions do. I'm going to hop into another example now. This one's from the USA, and I've included this one as an example because I think it's actually quite interesting that we've got a bi-directional facility on the northern leg. Maybe I'll just don't reference to that compass. I'm just going to say the top of the screen is north, bottom of the screen is south, just for ease of reference. But yes, on the northern leg, we've actually got a bi-directional facility which runs across there, which is just, I suppose, a slight difference to other protected intersections because it's generally just one-way traffic the whole way around the intersection. But once again, you can see there is a clear offset from left turning traffic lane and your bicycle lane. So this offset I will show in, let's try for yellow. Let's see how that goes. Yeah, yellow's okay. Have a look at this offset. That's really what provides this line of sight, is having that significant distance between left turning traffic and bicycle traffic. Traditionally, what would happen is you'd have your bicycle lane straight up next to the left turning, and you'd have something like this, where you'd have this really poor angle of, for the conflict point, and difficult to see cyclists in that space. I'll show an example of what this looks like on the ground. And once again, I have flipped this image around because they obviously drive on the right-hand side for the US, but just for our purposes, try to make things a little bit easier to comprehend. But here's the actual bi-directional facility. They do some little bit different treatments in the States. This is probably not what we do in Australia. But you can see clearly the refuge islands, the corner refuge island here. And this section here, a little bit difficult to see. It is still part of that island, but it's actually flush mounted. And I'll get into a reason why that's kind of important. It ties into the heavy vehicle swept path design question that came up before. But you'll see that there's a part of the island that's raised above the ground and then part of the island that's flush with the rest of the pavement. I've got one more example to show as an international example, which is actually a little bit more common to what we have in Australia, in that this is actually from the UK. This is in Manchester. It's got a really funny name. It's called the Cycle Optimised Protected Signals Junction, which I'm sure the reason they called it that funny name is because then it gets abbreviated as Cyclops. So it's got a cool little way to break it up. So let's have a look at Cyclops. Once again, you can see our curb islands. I'm going to change my pen again. Our curb refuge islands located on each quadrant of the intersection. And they obviously jut out to protect cycling in this space. And cyclists, once again, are carried off right at the off-road facility like this, and left-turning vehicles, once again, have a much improved line of sight when turning left and crossing at conflict point. Another thing that I like about this design in particular is for cyclists that don't want to take this somewhat circuitous route. I mean, if you're ever having to go left and right as a cyclist, you know, just like as a pedestrian, you kind of want to go straight through. You want to take the easiest route possible. But if you were a cyclist, I don't see any reason, I haven't actually cycled this, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't prop here, wait for the green to go, and then move with general traffic and, you know, complete that maneuver. And although you do not obviously get that safety benefit because you've still got this conflict point here, it does provide for cyclists that, you know, they want to actually, I suppose, take the risk through that intersection, and they prefer to just power through the intersection rather than take that slight deviation away from their alignments. So this particular example provides for both, which I think is quite interesting. And if you were waiting at this point here, I might have to delete all my ink. There we go. If you were propped and waiting here, so you're already in front of the cars, then you don't really need to worry about a left turning vehicle because you're ahead of all the vehicles anyway. So it's just another reason why this design is actually fairly sensible because it provides for those that are not quite comfortable tackling the intersection, and they've got a greater level of safety taking the this route shown, as opposed to those who are much more confident on the saddle and are willing to take the risk associated with this other movement. I suppose I should also just discuss on how the right turning traffic works, sorry, cycling traffic works in this environment. So once again, I'll just clear my ink on the slide and let's have a look how a right turning cyclist. So a cyclist would have to prop here, they prop just up here and say it's a red. Hopefully they get a head start, but maybe they get a green with the general traffic as well. And they want to turn right. So then they continue this movement along here, continue here, and then they stop and pause here. And once again, they have to wait for the green to occur, just like with the general traffic as well. Completely protected by the Corner Refuge Island. Once the green goes, they can continue this movement and they get to this fork again, and they can make the decision, oh, did I go the right way? Do I need to do a U-turn and head back the way that I came, or do I just continue my journey and complete that right turning maneuver there? So you see you've got clearly like forks in the road where cyclists are given the opportunity to pause and queue, which was kind of shown in that original graphic there. And it just allows for cyclists to take those right-hand turns without having to merge with general traffic. So rather than typically what may occur for a right turning cyclists, I'll highlight another route that may be a common maneuver, would be a hook turn. So a cyclist coming here and then just parking up here and waiting for the lights to go and then heading straight across like that, which is a fairly common cycling way to turn right. Another option is, of course, is to move in with your general traffic, cut across the lanes, park yourself right in front of all your traffic and wait for the gap in the traffic and then turn right. This second option is probably for the more advanced or experienced cyclists that feel comfortable doing that. I'd say that first option is certainly if you're not quite at that level. But nonetheless, you don't need to worry about that for the protected intersection because you've got these special storage areas to prop and wait. So here's what it looks like on the ground. Huge bicycle boxes, massive. And you can see the bicycle push buttons are obviously right next to where you need to prop and wait here as a cyclist. That's really important to consider. It's not much point to have that over on this side where you have to then cross over onto the pedestrian crossing. So I think that's a really important detail that's perhaps not always considered. And I've just got a few snaps here of happy cyclists using this particular environment and making the most of the protected intersection. I'll pause here again and just check in with Emma to see if we've had any comments on anything discussed so far.
There's a bit of chatter going on, but there is a question, Max. Do crossing signals need to be optimized for protected intersections?
Yes, I would imagine there would be, so by optimize, I assume you mean there needs to be changes to the phasing and the like. I would expect that would have to occur as you've probably given a changed amount of green time for through movements, as well as depending on what would be considered the most popular movement for the cycling community. So say, for instance, if it's a right turn that continues that strategic cycling corridor link, if that's the predominant movement that you need to provide for, then I would certainly look at discussing with the signals team, how do we create this intersection to ensure that the green phasing is maximised for right turning cyclists? Because if that's considered your predominant movement or your most important, I'd look at putting in some phasing to really maximise that. And just on that point, I might actually touch on, it is included in the 360 video. I do mention it, but I might discuss this point again here. For Melbourne's protected intersection, it is on a strategic cycling corridor. I'm going to say it's about a 5 kilometre length. Let's just say that. that runs from Melbourne CBD to just an outer suburb, an inner city suburb. And if you are traveling at a reasonable cycling speed between 20 and 30 kilometers per hour in the morning peak, so between 8 and 9:30 kind of thing. So if you're traveling at cycling speed, average pace, you will get nothing but green lights heading from the inner city suburb all the way into the CBD. And they've deliberately set up the phasing to make cycling within that environment as attractive as possible. So rather than hitting reds all the way and, having a stop start, and it's not very pleasant as a cyclist, you get this nothing but green. Same is applied for the afternoon peak. So you get to go home and enjoy your nothing but greens. And it's referred to as the green wave in Melbourne because it's nothing but green. And it just it makes a significant difference as a cyclist when you get to see nothing but greens going through, and certainly makes your travel times a lot quicker too. But anyway, that is discussed a little bit more in the video that we'll share later on, but just sort of touch on it. Any other questions, Emma?
There's one. What are the double yellow lines for?
They use that in the UK, and it actually means no parking. And if they use a single yellow line, it means parking is permitted, but with a permit. It's just a UK guidelines. That's just what they use there. Not that I would expect anyone to be parking at the intersection, so it does seem a little bit superfluous, but yeah, that's typically how it's used. Anything else, Emma?
Just a few comments on the Netherlands example about the concern around not having the raised refuge, which you touched on before.
Yeah, it is peculiar. As I said, Netherlands is a completely different culture to what we have here, so perhaps they don't need all the visual and physical cues that we kind of need here. Otherwise, motorists would be taking advantage of that beautiful wide radius you just provided them and just slamming around that corner. Sorry if I just pause for a drink, but I will get cracking into Melbourne's protected intersection. As I said, I'm quite proud to see this one happening in our own doorstep. But what I wanted to focus on here is the eastern leg, which it's a little bit difficult to see in this aerial imagery, but there is a protected bicycle lane on the eastern leg. This is before the project commenced. I should have highlighted. And just as in that Tasmanian example that Ken showed, it just dies. It just ends, and then it's good luck, cyclists. Just ride through the intersection as you see fit. There is a little bit of a bike box head start area there. That wasn't particularly well done. But other than that, it's this is what I would say a typical intersection arrangement for cyclists, which is you've got a bicycle lane, maybe 20, 30 meters on the approach to the intersection, and then it just disappears. And then it's up to you as a cyclist to navigate the rest. So the risks, obviously, in this instance are a cyclist that wants to travel through and a vehicle that wants to turn left once again. They would already be in this lane, so perhaps they're colliding with the cyclist at this space, and perhaps they didn't see the cyclist there due to the parked cars blocking their sight lines, or they're already travelling through alongside the cyclist. They don't see the cyclist whatsoever and collide at this point here instead. So this is the before example, and I think I've touched on it enough, but it's just terrible sight lines for the motorist to be able to spot the cyclist. So here we go, half before, half afterwards. You can see the advent or the introduction of the new corner refuge islands, and these I can confirm are physically constructed, not flush mounted like they do in the Netherlands, but it's okay. We'll leave the Dutch to the cycling waves. They are certainly the supreme, so that's how they do it. That's okay. And you can also see that one of the stand-up lanes was had to be eaten up by the cycle lane. So I will just scroll back to the previous slide just so you can see that lane disappear. Get rid of all those annotations, but you can see this left turn lane gets taken up by the cycle lane, and instead a through and left turn lane is provided. So that's just something to note of at this protected intersection. And our final design completed looks something like this. So you can see the corner refuge islands provided on each quadrant, and a protected facility all the way around, so you can complete those maneuvers. I've got the functional design plans that look something like this. Once again, very similar to what we're seeing on the aerial imagery, but I brought this up purely to discuss the iterations that went through to actually come up with the design for the corner refuge island. So here's how things started, as a little bean, and that's what the initial design was. There was a little bit of concern that this is actually not really enough space for a cyclist to kind of prop in this area and feel like they're protected from general traffic, which I think is a pretty valid concern. So they went for a design let's just try and make this a little bit bigger. Once again, this went through another change of design. Most likely, from memory, this was due to swept paths and ensuring that, obviously all the vehicles can travel around that safely. So you've got more of this kidney bean shape, as it's sometimes referred to as. And then it went to this boomerang shape. This last example, this fourth example that I'm highlighting here, this is to provide extra storage for cyclists to prop and wait in this area. However, that does come at the cost of being closer to your left-turning traffic, which is also not ideal, because you want to be, you don't want to be sitting too close to a left-turning traffic in case they do decide to mount the curb there. And the final solution was this guy here. So it's a little bit of a combination of, I suppose, the third one. But interestingly, what you have at either end of the corner refuge island is these mountable areas. So I'm going to just try and draw those out there. So those two areas are mountable. So that's flush. And the reason for that is for the heavy vehicles turning left, just to ensure that they are not needlessly tracking over the corner refuge island, that they can safely maneuver around this feature without having to continually to track over it. And that is both for the safety of the heavy vehicles, so they're not losing stability as they're turning, and also for the safety of everyone else at that intersection, because the last thing you want is for a heavy vehicle to be tipping over in that space, particularly if you're a cyclist standing underneath it. So that was the final design that was agreed to go for. So half of it is mounted and half of it is a physical curb and channel. And to get the stakeholders over the line to say that this is a really good, this is best practice, this is what we want cyclists to be riding on in Melbourne, and this is exactly the type of infrastructure that Melbourne needs. In order to get everyone over the line, they did do a full one-to-one scale of this intersection in a completely coordinated, safe environment. So this is a line marking of that intersection, done to scale. So it's all been mapped out by surveyors and line marking equipment, and it shows exactly where the curb islands are, the corner refuge islands are, as well as where all the cyclists are proposed to be crossing. And there was a few of these, test vehicles, which were deliberately there to check how sightlines were working and how turning radiuses were, and basically to see also how these dozen cyclists felt cycling in this environment, to make sure that everyone felt like this was something that could actually work. So I'll just reiterate that. They took the design and they pasted that in a one-to-one scale in this depot environment. So it's completely off-road. There's no, publics accessing this. This was purely for this trial, just to make sure that everything that looks good on paper also works good in this safe environment. And they ran a number of trials, left turning, right turning, cyclists turning right, cyclists going straight through and ignoring the cycling facility altogether. And all those different situations were taken into account. So here it is from the aerial as well. You can see this is a left turning vehicle here. He's about to complete this maneuver, and the cyclist is coming across in this fashion, and a pedestrian as well is coming across in this fashion. So you can see that they've tried to capture as most of the situations that would actually occur in real life as possible. And I've done a lot of talking so far, so I am going to ask Emma if we can open up the poll, and we'll see how well everyone has been, I suppose, grasping what I've been saying so far. So the question for the poll is: the most important feature of a protected intersection is maximizing sight lines between motor vehicles and cyclists? Is it conflict paints? Is it banning general traffic movements? Or is it separating the phasing between general traffic and bicycle traffic? So hopefully everyone's got the poll popped up on their screen, and if they want to answer what they think is the most important feature of a protected intersection. I'll give you a few minutes just to have a flick through.
I've been answering a few questions in the background here, Max, as individuals pop in. A few questions to the panel that we can knock off, and any that are sort of relevant for everybody, we will be sure to share with everybody. But lots of good chatter, and we encourage that. Keep your comments coming in. People liking the intersections, commenting on them. There's some people with some very good knowledge of the UK traffic systems.
Yes, it's certainly a novel kind of treatment, so I can understand if people are scratching their heads and wondering exactly how this would work, and it's kind of what this forum is all about, to let people know that this does exist in other parts of the world, and we're starting to see it in Australia as well. So it's certainly a feasible solution in lots of spaces. Emma, would you mind sharing the poll results?
Certainly, Max. Here we go. Can you see them there?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yeah, it's just popped up. So the most important feature of a protected intersection is, at 96%, maximising the sight lines between motor vehicles and cyclists. So excellent. That's exactly right. And that's generally facilitated by providing that offset from the traffic lane to the bicycle facility. So it's good to hear that everyone's understood that aspect of the design. And we will continue through. I've got some footage now of the Melbourne protected intersection, and this is taken out on site whilst cycling as well. A really fantastic example of how the left turning vehicle and cyclists travelling through interact. So here we go in this very, very bright yellow. Hopefully that's not too difficult to see. This represents typically where a cyclist would be in a conventional intersection, right up next to, they would actually be closer to that left turning vehicle, but that's their general movement. That yellow line is where they would typically be in a conventional intersection. So just keep that in mind as we go through. The taxi would be in that blue movements, obviously turning left. You can see the blinker there as well. So he is certainly turning left. And I'll hop to the next frame, which is about 10 meters closer to this intersection now. Once again, yellow is what a conventional intersection would look like. Blue is how that left turning vehicle would react to that conflict point, or where they would be turning, that movement there. And this final arrow is obviously the path taken by this protected intersection. So you can see, as I've illustrated in other examples, but this is a real world example, this particular conflict point, these angles, difficult for the taxi to be able to spot a cyclist. So right now, if I'm the cyclist in the yellow movement, I'm thinking, do I need to brake, hit the brakes and let this left turning vehicle go because they're not going to see me? Or do I bite the bullet and speed up and hopefully get through this intersection without them clipping me? So let's have a look at the next frame, which is perhaps 5 meters now closer to the intersection. And once again, yellow. So that's conventional intersection. It'd probably be even closer to that taxi, to be honest. Blue showing the taxi there, and that pinky purple well and truly away from the turning vehicle. And as you can see, for those that actually look inside the taxi, you can see the taxi driver, his angle of vision is kind of already pointed towards this crossing point and also towards the cyclist. So his angle of vision is, this perfectly demonstrates the purpose of this protected intersection, because he is looking exactly where cyclists would be. So rather than just turning left and hoping for the best, he's got a fairly good line of sight to be able to spot oncoming cyclists and obviously give way if required. So we really like this guy because he's doing a great job. He's slowing down and he's got his left turn blinker on and he's paying attention, giving way to cyclists. So another point that I just want to discuss, the final point for the protected intersections, is just this idea of a recognition zone. And that's the idea that, well, we need to provide a certain amount of space leading up to the intersection where either left or through traffic can actually spot the cyclist. And what that typically means is removing any obstacles or obstructions in the space. So parked cars, if there's, I don't know, billboards or lots of utility poles in quick succession that would block sight lines for cyclists, getting rid of that, because in this recognition zone, you've got an ability for the motorists who are turning left to be able to spot the cyclist. And then as they approach this decision zone, okay, I need to stop, I need to slow down because that cyclist is going to travel straight through. And then obviously this final stop zone, giving them adequate time to stop. So just another thing to consider as you're going through these designs. Okay, signalized intersections. So that's it for protected intersections. And it's my favorite time of day where I ask, what's wrong with this photo? I feel like I need a little jingle with this particular part of the presentation, but we can see you've got a very confused cyclist there looking at this intersection and think, hang on, what's going on here? I'll just pop her out of the way and we'll shift this down here so it's a bit of a clearer look at the intersection. But if anyone wants to add into the chat what you think's wrong with this intersection, and I'll be completely honest, it's not one thing. There's plenty to comment on for this one.
Max, can I just jump in with a couple of questions just on the protected intersections before we finish that section? It's just a question on what traffic volumes do those sorts of intersections see? So
Albert and Lansdowne, that protected intersection in Melbourne, they are significant movement carriers, I would say. I wouldn't have the figures in front of me, but yeah, certainly thousands of AADT per day. Yeah, they're not local streets or anything like that. It was previously used as basically a rat run through the city and as an alternative to much busier arterials, but certainly very busy corridors for general traffic.
Great, thank you. And is there any crash data from before and after the protective treatment was implemented?
Because this is still relatively recent, they're still undertaking that evaluation, but I imagine there will be an evaluation report or the like that will come out to demonstrate exactly how well this treatment is performing. But yes, I suppose just watch this space at this stage. Great,
thanks, Max. Well, we're getting lots of good responses to the what is wrong, so I guess we can move on. Thanks, Max.
Okay.
So, I can say there were some rough surface. Going straight into oncoming traffic. And drainage, bad road surface, poor signage. Where the cyclists go, it's not really clear for cyclists. There's no markings. Like that, rough surface drainage. Yeah, lots of things. Yeah.
Lots of rough surface. I personally would not be comfortable on my road bike cycling. That looks like you need a mountain bike to get across some of those humps in the road. But yeah, it's just a strange example of where you've got the crossing diagonally to complete your movements, which is fairly unusual. Typically, you'd try and get cyclists over in one side of the intersection and crossing at another point just to keep everything kind of at perpendicular angles. And as that suggestion was, you're relying on all these vehicles to stop at the red light, but as we know, not all vehicles do that. And if they don't do that and you're cycling through, then you've got a head-on collision, which is just not going to be a good outcome. So yeah, really peculiar example. Another thing about the planters, I might have vented my opinion on those earlier, but yeah, once they get overgrown and they don't look so good and you start dropping leaf litter in the bicycle lane and the like. Anyway, that example is actually in Canada. So just something I wanted to include in this slide, but yeah, it's an interesting example, not one I'd feel particularly comfortable riding through.
Someone's commented that there's a veggie garden in the road.
Perfect, that's right. Okay, so signalized intersections. There's a few different typical examples of how head starts are provided. So for those that aren't aware what a head start is, it's just these little boxes that allow cycling traffic to prop up in front of general traffic. So in other words, you've got the general traffic have a stop line, they stop behind that line, and then your cycling traffic are able to hop in front of that or given a head start. So that's the head start box. There's a few different arrangements that this takes place, and you can read more about this in the cycling aspects Austroads guides. Now, example number C is a really, really rare alignment. I'm not really sure why you would go for this approach. If you were going to put a bicycle box in this right turning area here, it means that the cyclist would need to cross over this traffic lane here, which is a little bit like you're introducing a risk for an unknown reason. Instead, if you were to provide a bicycle box that kind of covered all of that area there like this, then you've got your cyclist traveling in just this one direction and then able to prop out in front of your general traffic. So example C is an interesting one, not one that I would particularly recommend, but perhaps there's reasons to be implementing that for particular examples. So this example D is more what I was considering for example C, where you've actually just got the one cycle lane and then opportunity to hop right in front of all the traffic movement lanes. You may not necessarily need to do that. If you don't want to be promoting right turning cyclists, for instance, then you wouldn't be putting a bicycle box in front of the right turn lane, which is kind of what's shown in this example A over here, where yeah, you basically either want your cyclists to be turning left or cyclists going straight through, but you're not really providing for that right turn movement. And there might be reason to do that because perhaps the right turning movement is leading to an unsafe cycling facility where there's nothing at all. So that's just something to keep in mind. For left and through treatments, there's a couple different ways you can kind of facilitate this. One is to let the cycle lane kind of just end, and then these sharrow markings pop up again, which demonstrate to cyclists that, hey, you now have to claim the traffic lane, so you're now riding in the traffic lane, but also communicates to motorists that cyclists are sharing this space now, so be mindful. These are obviously not as a fantastic example as what we were seeing before with a protected intersection where it's completely separated from left turning vehicles, but this is just something to keep in mind what can be done in this situation. Another arrangement seen here is where the cycle lane juts out in front of the left turning vehicle lane. Both of these are relatively common. What I've seen and what I'd consider best practice in this second example is actually providing a little speed cushion or the like right at this point here. And so that means a left turning vehicle has to slow down because of that speed cushion. And it just gives that slightly, or it obviously reduces the operating speeds where if a conflict were to occur, at least the speeds would be fairly low, given that they are colliding with that speed cushion. So a speed hump, for those that are not familiar with that terminology, but just a little raised section where you can just use bolt down products. And if you install it there, then you're reducing the conflict speed. I've got an example here of basically both of those treatments used at the same intersection. So on the eastern leg here, I've got a cycle lane, which then just disappears and then it becomes a sharrow in front of the left turning traffic. So hopefully communicates to motorists who were in this through lane that, okay, if I'm turning left, I need to give way to, I need to be aware that I'm sharing the lane now with cyclists. And on the other leg, the western leg, is once again, the bicycle lane just drops off and it's basically a free for all and right up until the intersection. So it doesn't look like there's actually any head start boxes at that intersection either. So not a fantastic example. This used to be on my route to work. I used to cycle this every day. And yeah, this part of the intersection generally felt pretty good. I felt good that the shower is there and some kind of communication that I'm going to be sharing this space. The western leg of the intersection, so this is me cycling home, and the bicycle lane just drops off and then it's a free-for-all. There's 3 traffic lanes for me to negotiate. Not so comfortable. So that's just a bit of anecdotal experience. Here's another example, really, really common, freeway interchanges and the like, or in higher speed environments. Once again, ideally, this would be a separated environment altogether, so I wouldn't have to be doing any kind of presentation on what to do here, but we do live in a world where this kind of treatment does exist. But I suppose this huge slip lane across here for left turning traffic, you can see it crosses over the bicycle lane. And rather than the design stating that the conflict point kind of only exists, the conflict paint only exists at the conflict points, they've extended it kind of all the way back here. It's not a very clear color, got a yellow. The green paint starts all the way back here and runs all the way through the intersection up here. I think that this provides a little bit more clarity that, you know, there's cyclists in the area and not just at the conflict points where the left turning traffic is, which is probably, probably more common. You'd only be focusing on where that conflict exists and applying the conflict paint there, but bringing that back a little bit more creates better definition of the bicycle lane. And it probably also takes into account this left turning slip lane traffic here because they've got the conflict paint for them as well. Hook turns for cyclists. This is a really common way to negotiate right turns, particularly in Melbourne. We love them. We do them in our vehicles as well. So not just for cyclists, but for general traffic. But basically, yeah, rather than a cyclist having to stop here and kind of give way and wait for through traffic to have a gap, they can instead prop away from the through traffic, let everyone else go. And then once this east-west movement is given the green light, then they can go for it. So interestingly, in this example, you'll see that the hook turns are only provided in 2 of the 4 legs. And although this is just an example, I would suspect that the reason for that is because you don't want cyclists on this route. You don't want the cycling traffic to take other routes. You just want to emphasize exactly where they should be going. So it's may not always be required on all legs of the intersection. Here's an actual example as an aerial view. So you can see the hook turns are provided on each side of the intersection, and I'll just blow that image up. This is what it looks like on the ground. So you can see clearly it's an opportunity there for a cyclist to pause and wait to head right. You can also see the arrow there is provided as well, just to clearly demonstrate exactly what turn maneuver is required from the cyclist in that space. I've seen instances where the bicycle box is extended kind of like this, and the cyclist instead heads for this area, which obviously would change the pedestrian crossing point. Both of them are fairly good examples of what to do in this space. I'd probably prefer this second example because you've got then a greater offset from this live traffic lane. So the more you can get away from traffic that's currently live as a cyclist, the better. So rather than being fairly close to it, if you're able to get on the other side of the pedestrian crossing, I'd kind of promote that instead. I'm going to discuss bicycle signals here. I've got a really complex intersection. I'm not even sure how
I
many
think there's a
lanes
few
we've got.
questions.
Oh, sorry, Ken. Yep, let's have some questions.
There are a few questions. Just make sure I'm not going back too far. There's just a question around where the drawings come from, but we'll take that offline, Max, and we can follow that up afterwards, maybe.
Yep.
What are the speed zone area? What speed zones are appropriate for sharrows?
Okay, so in last module's presentation, there's a little graphic which shows different speed zones and what type of cycling infrastructure is typically considered appropriate. And for on-road cycling, where you're sharing the road environment, it's generally 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. And I should also just make a note there. In terms of the safe system philosophy, there's generally these safe system speeds for different crash types. So for instance, for head-on crashes, for intersection crashes, as well as collisions with cyclists, there's these safe system speeds, and anything above that speed is generally where the risk of a fatal or serious injury just rises exponentially. The speed for cycling collisions, so for a motor vehicle traveling at speeds of 30 kilometers per hour or less, that's generally taken as the safe system speed. So in other words, any speeds that are higher than that 30 kilometer per hour, if a motor vehicle were to collide with a cyclist, the risk of that becoming a fatal or serious injury rises exponentially. So we take that 30 kilometer per hour speed limit or operating speed as our, that's our target at this stage.
Great, thank you. And just a question on maintaining them. Are these sorts of treatments expensive to maintain? So, you know, having to replace the paint, the green treatments and things like that. And then there's just a follow-up note of not that the expense of a death or a serious injury would outweigh that. Yeah,
I suppose it's up to how particular jurisdictions manage their maintenance budgets and exactly what's available for spending. But I wouldn't, I mean, it is a common concern that these coloured pavement treatments in particular really provides, or they are some type of burden for maintenance reasons. But I would expect that the safety of, you know, highlighting this conflict point and providing, you know, a greater level of safety for cyclists outweighs that financial, I'm not even sure I'd call it a burden, but yeah, if we're building cycling infrastructure, I suppose we need to be aware that compared to general traffic, you know, how much motor vehicles really wear on pavements and the wearing course and all the different, you know, assets, structures and stuff like that. The amount a cyclist really, you know, contributes to that maintenance is negligible. The 2 tyres as compared to a 2-ton, you know, motor vehicle. Yeah, that's just my thought anyway.
And just one more, it actually popped up a little while ago just around all these new line markings and different coloured markings and things like that. Can that be a distraction for drivers, and can that be a concern?
Yeah, I think that's probably valid. And I suppose different practitioners have different opinions, but there is work to make these kind of treatments more harmonised across Australia and New Zealand. So there's Austroad's work trying to harmonise pavement markings and ensuring that they're being applied consistently across jurisdictions. But there's also very unique environments where if you are doing shared areas, for instance, where you're trying to bring operating speeds, you know, 10 kilometres per hour for motor vehicles, and creating really, really vibrant pavements in that particular area, I certainly see the benefit in making sure that that does not look like a road whatsoever. And yeah, providing the level of safety for cyclists and pedestrians and other road users in that space. And but yeah, I understand what you're saying. If you are introducing more and more colours to the pavement and the like, is it creating confusion? But I suppose as they become more and more common, then the people just become more familiar with seeing these and associating that with cycling infrastructure. I might just continue on the slides, Emma, because I've got a few more to get through before we wrap up today, if that's okay.
Yeah,
But
great.
any questions I didn't get to answer today, I'll hopefully be able to get in touch offline and answer those questions. But I've got a signalised intersection here, as I mentioned. There's lots of traffic lanes. There's 2 tram lanes in the centre here. The leg that I'm going to be focusing on is the southern leg, so down here. And I've got some perspective of what that actually looks like waiting at that little head start box. So I might just jump straight to that image there. And there is a bicycle lantern, which is currently not shown because the light is red. But there is a bicycle signal which allows cyclists to enter this intersection first, as opposed to general traffic. So this will go green, which means I as a cyclist can head straight through and continue my movement, which is fantastic because considering it's such a large intersection, you don't really want to have to be moving with the general traffic. It's nice to get a head start in this space. The qualm that I have this particular instance is I've shown the movement here that is meant to be undertaken by cyclists. So obviously that green lantern is to show that cyclists can go, they're allowed to enter the intersection. And the idea is it's telling them that they can travel in the through movement, okay? I was a cyclist traveling here, once again, anecdotal experience, and I wanted to turn right. I got the green light for my cycling, my bicycle lantern, and I thought, you beauty. All the other traffic has stopped. I'm going to turn right. Every other leg was stopped, and I felt very comfortable in doing this. I didn't really associate it with the green lantern, meaning I could only go through. And what that meant was I got about halfway and oncoming traffic, they got the green light as well. And because this is such a large intersection, say I was paused about here when everyone else got the green light, there's an obvious risk there of this oncoming vehicle colliding, or if it were to happen earlier on in the intersection, this vehicle colliding as well. So it's just an interesting example here of, although there's a green lantern with the bicycle symbol, it is only for the through movement. And I think that could have been better communicated with ensuring that under the bicycle symbol, or the lantern, sorry, perhaps just confirming that that is with a through arrow as well, just to really indicate that that is the movement that is permitted at that stage and not the right turning movement. Just a personal experience that I've had, and obviously there's no near misses or anything like that, but just something of note that I find interesting in these environments, because I'm sure there's other cyclists out there that would prefer to just hit the right hand turn while they've got all this stop traffic, but there is actually, yes, there is a risk in doing that, in that there will come a point in time where the through traffic will be allowed again and oncoming traffic could be headed your way. I've got this example here from Perth, which just demonstrates the bicycle signal implemented as part of the lantern and the pedestal all in one. So rather than have 2 separate kind of faces, you've got it all lined up there. And also it's not always required, but providing amber and red as well for your cycling phasing, just to obviously demonstrate when the phase is near to running out. So that one's in Perth, that particular example, but there's plenty of examples of that in Melbourne as well. I'm going to close the session now and share my screen to just go through some of the next session work. And I just wanted to show this particular example. This is a little bit ironic because this is obviously, as you can see here, a bicycle lane with some traffic management there installed saying that the bicycle lane is closed and you need to merge right. So you're going to go right in between that little narrow gap between the through traffic lane and these bollards. And the irony for this one is up ahead at this intersection is the protected intersection that they're building. So while they were getting ready to construct the protected intersection, which is meant to be the best cycling, most perfect example of best practice in all of Melbourne for cycling infrastructure. But during the construction of it, don't really think about cyclists. This kind of temporary arrangement that should do it. It's a little bit ironic. So not a whole lot of planning went into this arrangement, and it's a little bit disappointing to see, but that's all part of it, I guess. I'm going to share my screen now.
Max,
Just
a couple of points on that intersection you were sharing that you rode through.
The big one, yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps there could be a bike crossing point parallel to the pedestrian crossing to give some guidance.
Absolutely, yes.
Or perhaps maybe a hook turn could be an option.
I love it. Everyone's already on top of it already. All of those things would work perfectly, yes. I think as long as the cyclists feel comfortable exactly which manoeuvres are required at that intersection, or what's actually permissible, and which ones you should be not performing. Okay, so module 3, what we're talking about today is my screen shared there, Emma, on the Moodle?
Looks great. Yep, looks great.
So thanks everyone for the assignments that have come through, as well as the quiz number 1. All the work has just been terrific, and it's awesome to see that lots of people here are really engaged in what we're talking about, providing some really detailed answers and analysis for the Launceston York Street example, and really happy with the suggestions that are coming through, and glad that everyone's kind of thinking along the same alignment, acknowledging that there are obviously some curveballs along the way and things that make certain infrastructure a little bit more challenging. But I suppose in this space, what we're looking to provide is best practice for cycling infrastructure. So it's really promising to see those answers are coming through, providing exactly that best practice for cycling infrastructure. So round of applause for those that have completed the assignment 2 so far. I'm still waiting on a few more to complete quiz 1 and module 2 assignments. So Emma, we will need to just extend those opening times to ensure that those that haven't got around to it yet to be able to complete those assessments. And just a reminder that for completion of this course and to get your certificate that you've done the course, all the assessments are required to be completed. So and as now we have another assignment that I'll go through now, it's good to, I suppose, just keep chipping away at it rather than leave it all for the last minute, because it won't take you longer than I've seen the time spent on these assignments, generally 5 to 10 minutes per assignment. So it's best just to kind of get it done now while you've got the chance. But for today's module, the work we would like you to complete is, once again, have a review of the VR 360-degree video for module 3, which is on the intersections. You'll get to see that Melbourne's protected intersection working, and you'll get to see some pretty interesting, I will say, manoeuvres happening around as we're recording. So just, you don't always have to be watching the speaker. Turn the camera around and focus on other things, because there's some pretty interesting things happening around that intersection as we're delivering that spiel. So have a look at that. And also there's going to be a quiz after today, which is similar to the quiz that was completed in the first session. And everything's done online, and you should get your grade for that immediately. And it will cover everything that we've kind of discussed in today's presentation. So I'd recommend having today's presentation open up with you as well, just so you can reference that. And that's it from me. Anything else that I may have missed, Emma or Ken?
I think covered a lot today, Max, and just ticking right on time now. So well done.
Oh, I nearly got a perfection, but there's still a little bit of tweaking to do to get that timing a bit better. But thanks to everyone for staying with us. And as Ken mentioned, there was a lot of content, and I did focus a lot on the protected intersections just because how different that typically is to what we see out there on our current road network, but there is real opportunity to see more of it out there.
Yeah, and excited to see which the first will be in Tasmania.
That's right. That's the assignment number 4. Who gets to build
Full detailed design.
Okay.
That's the big prize.
Yes. Anything else I missed, Emma, or that's all?
No, I think that's okay for now. Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Fabulous. Okay, thanks everyone for joining, and have a lovely day, and we'll see you all on Thursday for the very last module.
Last one. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Bye, guys.